Hey everyone, welcome to the weekend, I guess, and welcome to our YA Fantasy debut panel. I'm going to be chatting with these amazing authors about all of these fantastic fantasy debuts, some which are coming up and some which have already released. So there's a really good mix for people's TBRs and shopping carts, I guess. First of all, I wanted to introduce a little bit about me. So I'm the moderator, and my name's Lily. I'm kind of all over the internet as Utopia State of Mind, and I really like sci-fi fantasy books. So as before we do author intros, I also want to just say that for these panels, we try to have a safe space, so we don't tolerate any harassment of any kind. And our goal is to create that safe space for everyone involved so that we can chat about books and writing and bubble tea. So know that if we find you engaging in any harassment or hate speech, you'll be removed and blocked from the chat. So now we are going to hear some intros from our lovely panelists, and then we'll hop into questions.
Hi, I'm Leslie Vetter, author of The Bone Spindle. The Bone Spindle is a gender-flipped Sleeping Beauty meets Indiana Jones, starring two girl treasure hunters out to break the curse on a sleeping prince. If you like adventure fantasy romps like All the Stars and Teeth, or like any of those action movies like Indiana Jones, The Mummy, National Treasure, this book is for you.
Hi, I'm Akshaya Raman. I am the author of The Ivory Key. And similar to Leslie's book, if you like treasure hunts, you might like my book. It is set in a world where magic is a physical resource. It's running out. And in order to get more, four estranged royal siblings go on a quest to try and find the mythical Ivory Key.
Am I next? Yeah. Sorry. I'm Emily J. Taylor, and I'm the author of Hotel Magnifique. And it is about a legendary traveling hotel. This is always weird that it's flipped. Where you wake up every morning in a different location across this fantastical world, and two sisters who take jobs there only to discover that the hotel is hiding some pretty gnarly, dark secrets. It is, if you like really magical books that have a very dark heart, let's check it out.
Hi, everyone. I'm Briss M. Nielsen, and I'm the author of Deep in Providence. And my book is a contemporary YA fantasy novel about three teen girls who walk a tangled path to try to bring their friend back from the dead. It has Filipino mythology and spirits. It's funny because I don't talk about this often and people don't know, but I think it's a pretty spooky book. There are a lot of spirits in it, and if you're into learning about Filipino mythology and into friendships, I think you might like my book.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Kilcoyne, and I am the author of Wake the Bones, a young adult Southern Gothic horror novel in which a young taxidermist returns to her family's tobacco farm in Kentucky to discover that nothing is as it seems and her bone pile has up and walked away. To figure out what's going on, she has to solve the mystery of her dead mother's past and confront a devil that has taken over her land. If you like Old Gods of Appalachia podcast or the Raven Boys, this is that sort of book.
Perfect. I hope that everyone is super excited. I know that I am. The first question, though, that I want to ask is kind of just about fantasy and magic. And so I want to know, how did you create the magic in your world? And how did you approach merging that with other elements of the world? Also, I'm also very intrigued by magical do's and don'ts. I really love kind of magic things, worlds, and sort of rules about magic. So if you could also share some of those, I would appreciate that.
Hi, I will hop right in. The Bone Spindle is a Sleeping Beauty retelling. And so I knew I wanted to keep a lot of the magic from that original Sleeping Beauty story, a curse that has put a bunch of people to sleep, a kiss that will break that curse, and just sort of all those great fairy tale vibes. But I also knew I wanted to make it a little darker. And so, when I was first imagining these fairies, I was like, probably not going to fit so much in this world. So I decided all magic in this world is witchcraft. A witch is not a gendered term in the Bone Spindle. Everybody who uses magic is a witch. And so I feel like the other piece that really made this magic come together in the world of the Bone Spindle is a lot of Sleeping Beauty stories have the prince go ahead and sleep for all of those 100 years. And so I was imagining, man, if you really slept 100 years, you would practically be a relic at that point. Not many people would remember you. And so I love the idea of magic not being like the golden time of magic, but being sort of lost. This being like past those halcyon days when magic was everywhere. And now magic is sort of mysterious. It's trapped in artifacts. Treasure hunters and other non-magical people are sort of finding old bits of magic here and there. And so I would say like those vibes really deeply influenced how magic is in the Bone Spindle. And so one of the definite big don'ts of the Bone Spindle is don't touch magical artifacts if you don't know what they do. Which definitely is how this book starts, with Fee touching a bone spindle that she really shouldn't have and getting tangled up with that sleeping prince.
I can go next. So magic in my world is a physical resource. And so my inspiration there was like growing up, a lot of the books that I read all had magic where it was like passed down through these long family lineages, and those lineages rarely looked like me. So I wanted to write a world in which anybody could learn to use magic. So it is really only limited by like the scope of your imagination. It is a resource. And of course, it's also limited by the fact that magic in this world is running out. So the fact that they only have so much of this resource to go around means that there's, certain people who are going to have more access to it versus other people. And in terms of like do's and don'ts, like the big sort of, I guess I shouldn't even say don't, but like the rule is that magic doesn't work on living things. So it can only be in objects. And so in order to work with this, you need to like be trained, and anybody can be trained. There's not like a natural affinity, more so than like just normal people having more aptitude for certain skills like we do in like our world. But I guess like the only really big don't is that you don't touch raw magic. So the thing that is mined, that can be really dangerous and poisonous. So if you touch it, you're going to have like a lot of potential like side effects from that. So that's like the only really big don't in my world.
Cool. I'll jump in. So my magic system took a lot of time to get to, but so I come at it at stories. I'm a big setting and premise first writer. So I have a tendency to ground myself in, I can't really start a story until I ground myself in the setting and have a premise where I know like the big overall idea of the book. And then everything kind of falls out of that. So when I came up with this story, I knew that I wanted it to have kind of this Belle Epoque feel, but not necessarily totally Belle Epoque. It has like music video references and a few things that feel a little anachronistic, but I did this weird deep dive into, what was it? It was 18th century French magicians' tricks and just the type of magic that happened during that period. Not real magic, but like people would go to these amazing shows and they always had these cool props. And I thought it would be fun to have this magic system that was based off of objects. And so there's all these really weird, interesting objects that do different things in my story. And I don't want to give any away because they would be spoilers, but they don't do things that you would necessarily assume that they would do. Some of them do really dark, terrible, evil things. For anyone who's read the book, you understand. And I'm trying to think of do's and don'ts. I would say don't assume that if someone has magic or not, because there's some people that have magic that are magic users that you don't really know right off the bat. It's very mysterious. Like you meet all these characters and you find out their roles in the hotel as you go along. So yeah, I don't know. It was fun. It was also born from my love of video games. I should say it's kind of like this merge of French magician's tricks, and then at the time I was really deeply into playing League of Legends. So it was kind of this mashup of those two things.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. So I feel like the magic in Deep in Providence is pretty personal. It was inspired by like a mix of things, but mostly I grew up with my Filipino grandfather, and I feel like a lot of the magic in this book is like elemental magic. So it's from the earth, it's from the sun, the moon, and when I grew up, these are some of the things he taught me. Like we fished and we gardened, and all of that to me felt like magic. Basically like living off the earth, and it all felt like magic. So I think a lot of it was inspired by that. But then he also told me ghost stories. Him and my aunties told me Filipino stories and mythology. So I've always been interested in that. I was a kid that was like, tell me more, tell me more. And I would be hiding under my mom's bed, not under my mom's bed, on my mom's floor, to go to sleep. But so a lot of it was inspired by that. And then there's this ancient Filipino belief that part of the soul stays on earth to watch over family members and loved ones when you pass away. So that is like a big part of Deep in Providence, is really inspired by that. And actually, I'm writing new books, and some of that is in these new books. And then I want to say that to merge it with the real world, Providence, where I come from, is also called the divine providence, right? So there's just, I don't know, there was always like this magic like lurking behind dark corners, and the fields, and like the old battlegrounds here, and all the haunted places. Like we have like a lot of haunted train stations, and there's just so much history here. And I think that's how I merged it, and I just wanted it to feel natural. I also used to do witchcraft with my friends, which is really random. We thought we were doing witchcraft, right? So I wanted it to feel natural. I wanted it to feel like anyone can do it. And I think, yeah, I think that's mainly it. I think some of the I don't know if there's any real do's and don'ts in my book. It's more like everything has a consequence. So you could probably do anything, but it's going to have a consequence. And that doesn't mean it's going to be bad. Because in my magic, in my book, nothing is inherently bad, but it might not go the way you want it to. So, and we see this a lot with the spiritual realm, right? So if you do any kind of spiritual magic where you're calling on spirits, anytime you do that, it's going to create an imbalance, and then the spirits are going to be able to come into our world and our realm a little bit more. So I would say it's more consequences than do's and don'ts. So yeah, that's me.
So Wake the Bones started based on an Appalachian myth called Rawhead and Bloody Bones, in which features fairly prominently. So I knew as soon as I was telling the story that I was going to have to tackle magic, not only from the point of view of how I wanted to use it thematically, but also look at the existing sort of structures for Appalachian witchcraft, which is a lot of it's very hierarchy based, like you were saying. It's very, sort of families pass it on from years to years, and there are some gifts that are accepted and some gifts that are taboo. And when you're dealing with sort of a story about like a dying town and sort of a dying way of life, you have to look at who's inside, who's outside, which taboos are breakable and which things are functional. But a lot of the existing sort of magic within Appalachian sort of stories that's not considered taboo wasn't really what I needed to deal with the huge topic of grief and death and losing a parent. So I looked at what was outside, and I looked at sort of what was taboo. And I came up with sort of a very, I wouldn't even say system, it's fairly fast and loose, how I play with magic, just to sort of get to the end of what I need to be doing with it. But I wanted to highlight this indissoluble connection that everyone has to the land, no matter how they decide to use it, no matter whether they decide to stay on it or leave. So a lot of the Wake the Bones magic is tied to the idea that you can do things. You can do a lot of things. You can do fairly powerful things, but the land is still going to be doing what it's going to be doing. And if you get sucked into the current, if you get sucked into the undertow, if something bad happens, it's because magic is a larger mystery, just like the woods, just like everything else, than you'll ever be able to understand. So that's really about as structurally as I got with it. I tried to pay some homage to the traditional sort of ideas that stay with the folklore, but I also, it just grew from there.
So now I want to ask a few questions that will kind of pair elements together, because I don't know if you heard, but already there are like very common threads between books. So I want to first start with the Ivory Key and the Bone Spindle, which, as mentioned before, very much have an element that I loved, which is this like archaeological puzzle treasure hunting kind of vibe. And so I wanted to know if did you always know that would be in your story, like that aspect, and also how did you approach creating magical puzzles, or magical puzzles, or just even just puzzles in general?
Okay, I can answer that first. So yeah, I did always know that it was going to have some like puzzles and treasure hunts. It was a lot of what I loved growing up. And also, as Emily was talking about, like video games, I'm very new to video games, but like I really fell in love with Breath of the Wild. Like early on in the pandemic, that was like my like everybody else, I bought a Switch in early pandemic. And so like that was also like very influential on me in like how to explore like worlds and think about like puzzles and the intersection of sort of like magic and technology, which I always find really fascinating. But in terms of like how I actually constructed the puzzle, some of it was like looking at just history. Like there's one, there's like ciphers in the book, and that was a really there was a book that I read when I was probably like 12 or 13. It was like a nonfiction book. I found it on the shelf when I was visiting my grandparents' house in India. My uncles would just like bring their random books and just leave them on the shelves there. And so I would just read whatever I wanted when I was there over the summer. And there was this one year where I found this book that was literally about the history of cryptography. And I just found that so fascinating. And it kind of, went from like Julius Caesar all the way up through like World War II, like into like sort of more modern, like 80s and 90s, like the beginning of like modern cryptography, and all that stuff like was way lost on me. But the earlier stuff I found just so fascinating, like looking at the precursors to like the Enigma, like from World War II and stuff like that. So that was weirdly a really big influence on me. And so there are like ciphers in here, and there's other puzzles too, where I just like looked at a lot of things like from history. Considering this is just a straight up fantasy book, it is not historical at all. I was pretty surprised by the amount of research that I had to do. I don't know if like you all felt like, oh my gosh, this is like way too much research for like made up stuff. But I mean, I really enjoyed it. And of course, I also looked at things like my favorite movies, like growing up, like Indiana Jones, and tried to like sort of evoke that feeling, that vibe, even as I like changed things to like, work with my magic or like, suit what I needed to do. So that was sort of my inspiration behind all of the puzzly things.
Yeah, definitely. It was sort of the treasure hunting, like traps, ruins, and riddles vibe that really made me want to write this book. Even more than the gender flip Sleeping Beauty. That was the moment I knew I was like, all right, I'm all in because I can do the traps, ruins, and riddles. And so I would say for me, there was like a lot of diagramming, a lot of like making my wife try to like actually stand out somewhere and figure out like dimensions and rooms and things that I never did. And very often all of our work would be one single line in the book and not any more than that. But I think one of the most interesting parts of writing traps, ruins, and riddles that I didn't think of was how difficult it would be to express them on the page. Like I too had watched all these movies, played some video games, and when you have a visual trap, you have a lot of things you can convey all at once because you're just watching somebody run from a rock that falls from the ceiling or like anything. And as soon as I was writing on the page, I was like, wow, this is really complicated because I have to give you a lot of information all at once so that you understand this room or this trap or where these bars are going to come down from, while also not actually drawing a diagram and they're boring somebody with like, the minutia. And so when I was trying to write these traps, I actually went to sort of a different medium. I kind of like detective stories too. And I was like, okay, detectives do mysteries. And so you have clues that you find out. There are certain red herrings, and ultimately you get to the mystery. And so some of these traps I sort of back engineered, and I thought, what are the clues that we're going to need to find out to get through this trap? And so Fee, the historian character of the two, is sort of like a detective of ancient ruins for me, who has like sort of the inner monologue of finding clues and figuring her way through.
Perfect. Those are so many good like names of movies and video games that are bringing me back. And now I want to talk about Wake the Bones and Deep in Providence, because both of these are set in like more closer to our world than some of the other books on this panel. And so I wanted to know, how did you go about creating a sense of setting, since it's not like a completely different world? And that might not be as flexible as being able to create like every little detail of a world and making really kind of cater to what you need. And then also, what do you want readers to take away from the world building in your books? So like a two-parter question.
So I used setting as like another character. That was the thing that really made it move for me. I'm fortunate in that I live where I wrote the book, and I was able to really like walk through the farm and make notes of what flowers were growing when, and make notes of sort of what plants were interacting with each other at a certain time, which really helped me to build particularly to the climax of Wake the Bones. But understanding that the land really and the setting itself isn't stagnant. It is something that has desires, and then letting it use those desires to put my characters into deeper and more difficult situations, I think was really the key to getting into it for me. And that was what made the magical system real. I mean, I picked a pretty magical place, rural Kentucky in late June. I say sweltering with like 4 fans aimed at me right now, but it's a pretty magical place to start with. And so letting, the woods are weird. There's weird stuff in the woods. You're going to find something dead in the woods, and you always feel like something's watching you. So it wasn't much of a stretch to set a horror in the woods there. But it all came together really well. I was glad for that.
So I feel like I agree with a lot about with what Elizabeth is saying. A lot of mine felt like that too. And with me, I just kind of imagined Providence as having layers, I guess. So there's like our layer, right? Like here, and then there's the spiritual layer or realm, and then there's also like the sun and the sky. So I just imagined layers, and I think it helped me because I was thinking of like, this is Providence, but imagine Providence with like darkened street corners and ghosts, and imagine going to Uniconticut Park, which is like a big place in Providence, and it's a huge, it matters so much to the book. And going there and seeing this view and knowing you can use the moon on this view and like the earth there to create a spell. The plant life and thinking of like fountains and beaches and thinking of them as wishes and spells instead of place really helped. I think it really helped me because I'm like, everything has layers, right? So that's just basically what I thought of. I'm like, this is a layer. From the outside, you're going to just think of of just Providence as a setting, but I'm thinking of it like Mitchell Street, home of where you can, call on a ghost or what, you know what I'm saying? So it just was layers for me. And everything's just behind that veil. And then I think I said this earlier, but something I wanted readers to be able to take away is that they could like go to, I mean, I'm not recommending anyone do this because I did it when we were kids and my mom's still like, I don't know what you were doing in my house. But I wanted readers to feel like they could just go to a store and pick up some candles and do some of this magic. I wanted them to feel like they could plant in the garden and heal themselves, or like, I'm not recommending, I'm not saying that that's possible, but I just wanted it to feel like that. I wanted it to feel real like that, and I hope I accomplished that. But yeah.
Can I add? I feel like, especially like if you grew up in a place and you love it to the layer that you're talking about, like I know exactly how you feel about this, and that's how I felt about Wake the Bones. You're never all that far from low fantasy, particularly if you grew up like a weird little kid doing witchcraft in the woods. Like it's never been impossible. So it makes it easier to really let your imagination sort of stretch and figure out, for the purposes of the story, what sort of magic that's been vaguely lurking around the corner your entire life you need to harness right then to make the story go.
Yeah, I agree. Like something about just even like weird stuff, like me, it's like snakes slithering and stuff like that, you know what I mean? And like being able to hear that. And I don't know, as a kid, I was that weird little kid, like doing all kind of things. And I'm like, the snakes are talking to me, like, all, so.
I was parented in part by ghost stories, like not officially, but there were these very practical sort of don't go in the woods stories that you always got told, where the shorthand was like, oh, let's do something supernatural. Like, oh, don't go play out by the old livestock well, because that's where little girls drown.
Yes.
And then, it's true, but there has to be some sort of element of horror to guide you as a kid really away from that. Like, oh, I can't go in there, there's bodies. Like, I'm not getting on that thing, there's bodies under there. So that was sort of, there's always been a ghost story sort of parenting me through this, and then I turned it on its head and I parented it back.
I love that.
Yeah, I love this idea of kind of like the magic in our everyday lives, and kind of how the smallest things, kind of what you all were mentioning, like the smallest things can seem so magical, and kind of have that spark that both of your books, I think, kind of just bring to life. And then finally for Hotel Magnifique, you mentioned as well the sibling relationship, and that was one of my favorite aspects of the book. So I wanted to know, was this always part of the idea behind the book, this complex and very strong sisterhood relationship? And sort of what is a scene between them that you might have had to edit out that you could share? I don't know if you can share them because I don't know if they're too spoilery, but I could have imagined that there's like, a lot of memories and a lot of things that, might have been cut out from the book.
So many things. I think I have an entire book that's been cut out of the book. I'm sure you all do too. So for me, it's funny, I didn't go into this book starting to write it thinking that it was going to be about siblings. It just kind of, I always had the sisters, and the book that I was working on previously before I started Hotel Magnifique was about them. And when I got the idea for the hotel book, I kind of carried that relation. I knew that it was a different set of siblings, but I knew that I wanted that relationship dynamic with this book. And it's interesting. I think I know I'm fascinated by sibling dynamics and how you can love someone so much, but then just want to murder them in certain situations. And there's, especially with the category of YA, I think it's hard I love ensemble casts and dealing with like this big group of kind of quirky, interesting characters. And I love kind of the interconnectedness between them. So when I started to write the book, I would get to certain situations with different characters. I don't know if none of you, I don't know who's read it or who hasn't, but there's a lot of sibling relationships in this book. I ended up having to take some out because people were like, there are too many siblings. But I liked the fact that they're in this really high stakes environment, and with these people that they love that they have to protect, essentially. So there was something really interesting about that. And then as far as scenes that I cut out with the sisters, trying to think of any good ones. I know I redid the whole beginning multiple times. But there was at one point, the little sister, her name is Zoza, and she like she ran away to the hotel and left her older sister behind, and it was a whole thing. And her older sister worked in the book right now, she works at Tannery, and I keep it pretty, it's I don't think I ever explained what kind of a tannery, but it was a whole thing, and it was a fish leather tannery that I did all this research for, and and it's a thing, and you can tan fish hides and dye them different colors, and it was that was interesting. But they had a whole story before the book started, or before the story at the hotel really took off, and I just kept getting the comment of like, get them to the hotel faster, get them to the hotel faster, because people just assume, I mean, you assume that it's going to be about that location. So I ended up cutting so much of that. And I think in the book itself, I don't want to give away spoilers, but they're parted for a majority of the book. And I wrote a couple chapters, I remember, from Zosa's point of view. And then I decided that it's really about Johnny's, the older sister's story of like going through the hotel and her learning everything. And I ended up cutting those. So better or worse.
I love the fish hide, or I don't even know what it's called. Yeah, fish leather.
Fish leather. It's cool. I actually ordered some of it because it comes in all different colors. It's a whole thing.
Also, I wanted to remind people that they can start thinking about or dropping questions in the chat. I have a few questions, obviously, that I want to answer, but after that, we can get to some of the audience questions. Speaking of characters and side characters specifically, some of my favorite elements as well, kind of generally through all of your books, is this idea of friendship and the friendships you create and cultivate throughout the book. And so I wanted to know, how do you manage to create detailed and nuanced side characters? And if you could pick a favorite. I know that's a hard question, and everyone's kind of like, oh, I can't pick a favorite. So that's still my question, though. Sorry.
Okay, I'll jump in. So, I think I have a problem with creating characters that I feel like are main characters, like side characters. So my side characters have like main character syndrome, and like I want to write whole books about all of them, but I think it helps. It's hard. It's hard because I have to like know when to pair back because I'm like they're the side character. But also I think it helps give them detail and nuance. Like I don't want them to feel like I don't know. I want them to they're integral to the plot. I guess I want to say that. So it's not just that they're tools, but they actually matter to the plot. So I think that helps with creating good side characters. I will say there's so many. I love all of them, but I think my witchy auntie Lindy is my favorite. I have plans for her in the future, and I just love that she has this whole plan. I'm not going to spoil anything, but if anyone has read it, they know she has like this whole plan from the beginning of the book. So it's like a big plot twist at the end, and she has like this whole plan. And I love that the whole time we're reading her, you might be reading her differently than she actually is. I just love that. She's so secretive, and she's quippy, and she's funny, and I don't know, she's everything. She's sarcastic, like just everything I like to write. I love her so much. So if anyone reads it and they enjoy her, please let me know because she's my favorite.
All right, I will go. So my book is actually told from the perspective of 4 siblings. So I have 4 points of view, which was a lot. And it was very hard to write side characters because, like, a lot of like big cast books tend to have like relationships where, either the romantic relationship or like an antagonist relationship or something like that is within those points of view. When you think of, something like Six of Crows, for example. But with my book, like everything other than the sibling relationship was external. So like romantic relationships were external, friendships were external. So it was very hard to basically come up with these like different dynamics for each of the siblings so that they had separate distinct relationships with these people. And so when it came to creating the siblings themselves, like I also knew that they had to be like their personalities had to be different enough so that it felt like engaging to read, but they had to originate from the same place. Like, whatever lessons or traumas the people who raised them like inflicted on them had to then present in these different ways. But there needed to be that like core, like it come from that same shared place. And so I basically thought about those like differences and tried to, when I built my side characters, think about what is it that this particular character sort of needs, like what is sort of missing in that relationship. And that was how I explored like side characters. And so because again, I have so many points of view, it was very hard to have too many side characters. And I also tend to like overpopulate my books with characters and then have to like cut a lot of stuff back. Like I think Emily and I have a very similar like revision experience where it was like a lot of like, okay, like we need to shorten the beginning. And I also have like many, many, many thrown out drafts of this book. And so there were lots of side characters that ended up like going on the quest towards the end that I ended up taking out because so that, the focus could stay on the siblings. But a very like minor side character I really enjoyed writing is this like mercenary character. His name is Surya. He's in one, like maybe 2 scenes, but he was just very fun to write because he was just kind of a terrible person. And it was like nice to get to write a character who's sort of unapologetically like that because all the siblings are like trying to do good. They might make mistakes, but their heart is in the right place. And to have a character who's maybe not quite that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, the sort of way that I tried to decide on side characters, I also did multiple points of view. It's Laurel's story, but there's a lot of aspects to that. The way that I try to structure it is deciding that, these characters have something that your character needs, but they also have their own desires that are going to absolutely complicate your character getting what they want and what they need, like the relationship between Laurel and her best friend, Isaac, they both love each other very much. They want to stay in each other's lives, but Laurel has decided that she is coming back home for better or for worse. And he has many, many reasons why he needs to leave. And so sort of structuring, there's this very genuine love. There's this very genuine desire to be, in each other's lives, but this insurmountable problem that they could both solve if they looked at each other's characteristics, but they're both too stubborn to really do it, is helpful that way. And, Isaac's love interest, Garrett, is he doesn't have the same problem that Isaac has by any means, in that he is perfectly capable of fitting into their hometown. He loves living in their hometown, but at the same time, he also loves and wants to be with Isaac, who is leaving no matter what. So the choice between, place and person, it's harder to make than a lot of people consider. So making sure that your characters need each other in ways that they may not even be willing to acknowledge, in ways that they may not know themselves, is really the way that I enjoy structuring it is an ensemble cast, and I like creating an ensemble that is so entwined that they can only really solve their problems at the end of the day together.
Cool. I love that. I would say for mine, trying to think of how I when I plan a book, So I completely pantsed Hotel Magnifique when I wrote the first draft. Now I'm a little bit better in learning how to plot and still doing my thing. But I think that I know what the side characters are going to be when I start, and then a lot of times I change them as I'm writing, and it literally comes down to their dialogue a lot of times and how they interact with each other. So I'll have a scene where I'll start writing a character and I'll think like, this is their backstory, this is who they are, and I'll start writing them interacting with someone else, and the dialogue feels really flat. And I'm like, what if I like change their, I don't know, like sometimes I'll flip gender or like change their socioeconomic status, and it changes that dynamic in the dialogue until it's something that I feel like sparks for me in that scene. And then usually that can kind of carry through the rest of the book. So, and that helps, like their dialogue for some reason, when I have that all feel really different. I tend to write really big ensemble casts. I don't know. I'll challenge myself one day and write a really small cast, but it helps differentiate them as you're reading the book too. And I think, I don't know, just anything I can do to help pull them apart, because I like my big casts. And for Hotel Magnifique, I would say some of the minor characters too. Like I really liked writing Yrsa. She's not even gray. She's like full black, dark character. And then there's a character called Hellas that comes in towards the end, and he's very gray, like morally gray. So those are probably, I don't know. I love all my children.
So the main friendship in the Bone Spindle is between those two main girl characters. And I think I knew right away that I wanted them to be total opposites who were like knocking heads, like dragged into a reluctant partnership. And so right away, like we have Fee, the bookish historian, who like doesn't trust anyone, doesn't believe in true love, and Shane, this queer axe-wielding warrior with like a hot temper and a list of enemies a mile long. And I wanted their ability to form this friendship to be based on like really genuine interactions that just really they got on each other's nerves, but then could form this ride or die friendship. And I think my favorite side character is actually they have sort of like a mentor helper character who gives them a little push along the way, which is near the beginning. They have one moment where they might just walk away from each other forever. And there's a fellow named the Paper Witch, and that's sort of a title and a name all rolled into one. And he's like a very friendly vegetarian armed with a very disapproving look for your actions, who pushes them on the way and says like, you have got to see this through to the end. And so he's a very minor character, but I think it really vibed with him. And so like he's one of my favorites in that book.
So we have some good audience questions. By the way, I'm going to drop the giveaway link in the chat, and the giveaway should be open for a week. So there you go. And the first question we have from Mike is, how did y'all get so lucky with such amazing covers? I'm not sure if there's like a formula for this or what the what the answer is for it, but I'll let you all figure out how to answer that one.
I mean, it really just was luck. Very, very fortunate. The design team was amazing. The artist they hired was amazing. The only thing that I wanted architecture on the cover. And so there's like, architecture is a really big part of the book. And I specifically wanted like South Indian style temples. That was the only thing I asked for. And what they gave me was like beyond my wildest expectations. And I just absolutely loved it, and we're working on like the book 2 cover now. I'm very excited to like see where that's going to go. So yeah, just my answer is just luck.
I'll jump in. I was an art director for a long time before I started writing, and I worked in design and marketing and advertising, and I feared my cover coming down with like I was so afraid, terror in my heart, and I told everyone that on my team. So they brought me into the process really early, and they let me see illustrators, and like I put together a deck, like a 10-page deck of like vibes, things I liked. But in the end, like I shouldn't have worried. Like they were on top of it, and the art director at Penguin was amazing, and the illustrators that they hired were amazing. So I feel good now. But yeah, terror, lots of terror.
I was surprised by the amount of influence that I was given over the cover, because I was basically told, just sort of going into the publishing process in general, like, oh, you won't have much say over this, you know, things will just sort of happen as they happen. But they had me send like a huge sort of like folder of vibes, essentially. And then Carrie Resnick and the Wednesday design team, I mean, I will never pass up a chance to sing their praises, because they hit the nail on the head. The illustrator who they picked is just, Jorge Mascareñas is just, I mean, incredible. I got to make one note, because in the original cover there weren't many leaves, and I was like, well, this is set in summer. And then they came back with the tobacco leaves without my even really like, and it just, that moment, like that, like still amazing moment where you look at your cover and you're like, oh, this is it. I got to really have that, and it felt, I mean, incomparable. It was one of the coolest things ever.
I feel like the gorgeousness of my cover is thanks entirely to that amazing artist that they found to do like the art of those girls. And when they showed me Fernanda Torres's portfolio, she's actually done a really amazing line of like modernized badass Disney princesses. And it was when I saw those, and especially her take on Belle, you know, the bookish princess, that I was like, this is going to be amazing. And so they did show me sketches, like, you know, at every stage, and I sent them like a big file of, you know, athletes and like, you know, hairstyles and like all the things that she would need to work from to make the characters come to life. But then like from the very first sketch, I just feel like that amazing artist brought that cover to life in ways I could never have imagined. And she's doing the book 2 cover too, with all the characters this time, all 4 of them. So I'm like, this is gorgeous. This is everything I could have wanted. But luck, yeah.
Mm, so I want to start with the fact that I had a different editor. Like, so I switched editors like halfway through the process. Well, she left. Tiff Leao was my original editor. And I think I honestly just got so lucky that she was my editor when the cover stuff first started, because she is a woman of color. And she knew how important that was to me, but it was also important to her to see you know, women of color on books, BIPOC kids like on books with like natural looking hair, and the skin tones right and all that. So I feel like I got so lucky having her for the beginning part, where she picked the illustrators herself. And then she came to me and said, here they are. And I was so happy, because it was all people of color. The entire, you know, there was like 6, 7 of them for me to choose from, and they were all people of color. So I felt like no matter which one I picked, I felt already blessed. Like I was like, okay, yes, this is gonna be good. So then there was that. And then I think along the way, they kept on sending me the sketches so that I was able to say, like, no, she needs to be darker. Her hair needs to be, you know, an afro. Like we need, you know what I mean? Like, so I just feel so happy that they included me in that process and that part of the process, because I told them how important that was to me. Like the setting, the background, all of that, like do your thing, you know, but like the actual characters, I was like, you know, this is important to me. They need to look like girls that I grew up with, you know, girls from Providence. So, and they look like that. So it feels like a blessing. And I just, Tiff Leao, like, we talk about it all the time still, because she knew how important that was. And yeah, I'm just thankful for that.
It's like what kind of one, Elizabeth, when you were talking about how it felt to see your cover, I was thinking it's like a say yes to the dress kind of moment where it like all just clicks and you're like, this is it. Another question we got is there something you wished you had learned on debut day that you wished was there if you had to do it again? So I know that Wake the Bones hasn't come out yet, so maybe this will be like preemptive advice.
Nice.
I wish I bought one of those book cakes. I'm sad that I didn't have a cake that was in the shape, or like a cake that looked like my book. Had I done it all over again, I'd buy a book cake.
My experience was a little bit weird because my book came out on January 4th and it was like right in the middle of the Omicron wave. So like my experience was like, well, all the stuff that you thought you were going to do is now just not happening and it's canceled. So I guess I guess it's not like a lesson or anything. It's not like the anything would I guess the thing that I wish had been different was that I got to have an in-person launch because I had to cancel my in-person launch and signing, and that's like, that yeah, it's not like a lesson, but that's just like the thing that I'm really looking forward to for like future books.
I also came out in January, and I was, really nervous leading up to my debut, and I was like, starting to sort of feel a lot of that anxiety. And so I think I let social media overwhelm me a little bit, like especially on debut week. And I really maybe went too hard on trying to like answer everything. And like I kind of wish I had not stayed up till 2 in the morning, on social media and just given myself a more of a break and just sort of taken that a little more easy and enjoyed some of the times like with my family and my friends a little more instead of kind of circling back to social media as much as I did. That being said, I really appreciate everyone reaching out. I should have paced myself a little better.
I
Oh,
felt the same too. Yeah, about social media. It was rough. Like I remember being up until like 1 in the morning every single night for 2 weeks straight. And I was just burnt out, kind of like I was looking forward to debut because it would be over. And I
Yes. Yeah. I 100% agree with that. And the other thing that I will say too is that I wish I had just gotten better about like not just social media in terms of like engaging with my own notifications, but like spending so much time like comparing myself on social media. Like that's something that's, much easier said than done. But like setting my own boundaries, I think that's like the one thing that I would always like say to other debuts is like, okay, it's okay to like mute people if they're like stressing you out a little bit. It doesn't mean that you like don't like them or you don't want to support them. It just means like you have to set your own boundaries and like, protect yourself. And I really didn't do that. And I kind of wish I had because I think my like enjoyment of debuting would have been a lot better had I been like a little bit more focused just on myself and what I'm doing rather than looking at other people and saying like, well, they're doing all of these other things. Should I be doing those things? Like, should I be like posting more? Should I be doing this kind of thing? Like, oh, just because somebody else has a street team, should I now have a street team? Like, I was like doing all that kind of comparison and taking on a lot of like pressure on myself that I maybe shouldn't have in hindsight.
To jump right in, because it's exactly how what Leslie said. Like that was, I feel like that was my exact experience for the first day. I was like so overwhelmed with answering people back, and I wanted people to know like how much I appreciated those messages and the love. But that was really difficult because it felt like I couldn't just settle and just enjoy like, oh my God, I actually didn't even really have time to visit my book in person that day because a lot of it, I mean, I have kids too. So it was like picking my kids up from school and you know what I mean? It was just like, stuff like that too. But I didn't get to visit my book in person or anything like that. I seen it that week. So, but I didn't do anything that I really planned to do that day. And a lot of it was because of social media and answering not just social media, but also like emails from the team and everything. Like I appreciate all the like the publishers and stuff, but you have to like I feel like the emails that I had to send back to them, I wanted them to be like thoughtful and you know what I mean? And I think I rushed to do those and I spent I think 4 hours at one point just answering those. And I'm not even saying like the up until the nighttime because that happened after, but during the day I was like, where did the time go? I don't even remember eating. But what happened was, and I feel like I got lucky with this, is that I experienced like the slump quickly, like the post debut slump really quickly. It was like that same day my book came out or something. So I actually told myself, like, you know what? These people that love me and have been supportive are gonna be okay with me not answering them back right away, and then I put up like one or two general posts and we're like, thank you for all the love, everybody. Like I can't get back right away. I think I still haven't got back to everyone right away still. And it's, my book came out weeks ago. So I did that and I said to myself, you know what? Put the phone down, enjoy with so I think I got lucky in telling myself like it's okay. People will still like you after this because you get like, oh, is everyone gonna not want to support me? Is everyone gonna think I don't like them and I didn't enjoy what they said or these posts about my book and like this is so beautiful? But I really said to myself, like, I'm not gonna have this experience ever again. So I think by the second day, I like disappeared from social media. Everybody was like, where are the people were saying to me, like, where are you? Like, why aren't you posting this stuff? And I disappeared, but I really think it helped me because I was in a slump. So I was like, let me take care of me before this turns into like something more serious. And that's a long answer, but it helped a lot. And it really made my launch special, if that makes sense. Like, because on my launch day, I wasn't even worried about posting on social media. I was just like, let me enjoy this time with my family and friends and loved ones. And yeah, that was nice. So
Yeah, that's exactly what I needed to hear. So I feel super spoiled right now. It's been, I mean, the weeks leading up to Pub have just been a really wonderful experience so far, though. There's been so much love for Wake the Bones that was just so far beyond my imagining, and I'm really grateful for it. But yeah, like you said, knowing that they'll be there tomorrow, I'm gonna put that on a post-it note and like have it in my view at all times because that's kind of how it feels right now. So, yeah, thank you.
Right? And don't forget to get a cake. There's still
My
time.
wife is on it. In like 2013, my wife is like, yeah, if you ever publish a book, like I'll get you a really nice cake about it. And I was like, deal. And now I've cashed in on that. So she's currently sorting that one out.
I can't wait to see the awaited cake. It's been like well earned, that cake. But yeah, I love that idea of how to deal with this post slump and having to know that if you don't like get back to people, then if they're like, truly caring about you as a person, they'll probably be okay waiting. I feel like that's just a general good like social media life lesson to learn, that you don't have to necessarily like respond to everyone immediately. Like you can take some time for yourself. So I feel like that's a good life lesson. The final really quick question that we have, well, not the final one because there are a lot of good questions, but one of them were, hold on, I have to scroll up, was what were some of the fantasies you read that influenced your debut books? There's more questions to it, but I'm just going to like put the fastest part of the question there.
I'll jump in. Oh, you I think so I feel like I wasn't influenced much by books because for some reason I haven't read a book and I'm not saying like, oh my God, this is so unique because I hope somebody can give me some recs for books that are like mine, but I haven't read a lot of books like mine. So I don't think it was that. It was more TV. So the movie The Craft was like a huge, like influence. I grew up I was born in the 80s and I grew up in the 90s and The Craft was a huge influence. So like The Craft and like even shows like Stranger Things. And then there were some characters I want to say like Bree from Legendborn was a big one. Bree is thrown into she goes from like a contemporary world and thrown into like a really fantastical world, right? So that is very different, but I will say like the character building there was a big one. And then Lyndall Clipstone's Lake's Edge, Letta was a huge one, and just the world in general, like the darkness and the shadows and all that stuff. I read it after Deep was already in past pages, but it made me want to like dig more into the atmosphere of Deep. So that was amazing. So those are my answers.
Apart from like the movies and stuff that I already talked about, a really, really big source of inspiration for me was also TV. It was the originals. My book has no vampires in it, but I really loved the idea of these like siblings saying like always and forever, and we're going to do all these things to protect each other, and then kind of doing horrible things to each other in the name of protection. I like to think my siblings are a little bit nicer, but that was like a really big initial spark of the idea for me. And in terms of books, this isn't like directly like similar to my book necessarily, but Susan Dennard's like Witchlands books, the world building in those books is phenomenal. And after I read Wind Witch, I actually sat down and I redid my entire world building, like back in whatever, 2017, 2018, something like that. Because like, you know, she like does so much and has like this expansive world and thinks through all these little details. And I was like, I need to do that. And it really inspired me to really like dig deeper into the world and just like make it more immersive. So that was a really big influence on me.
I could jump in. So I grew up reading a lot of Gothic fantasies, just Gothic, straight Gothic suspense novels. And I remember reading Rebecca like really young, and that spooky house vibe, and that definitely influenced Hotel Magnifique. If you read it, it actually started out like a little bit more of a horror than it is currently, but there's definitely some big horror elements in it. And in terms, I should say The Night Circus, because I feel like anyone that writes like a modern magical circus-ish book probably read that at one point and it changed their soul. So that book was a big influence. And then like modern writers, I love, I'm a huge fan of Laini Taylor, and just how her writing, like her prose are amazing, but also just her world building and how specific and kind of like weird and nuanced it is. I think she's just such a cool writer, and she has some she does really interesting things. So she's a huge influence of mine. And I don't know, I'm trying to think of other books. I remember I read a lot of nonfiction when I was writing this. I had Atlas Obscura, and none of the places that the hotel goes to are directly my brain is blanking right now, but they're not the same as the places in Atlas Obscura, but just the idea that kind of these weird, interesting places exist out in the world, and there's a mystery to that. I thought was really interesting.
I was really grateful for like Silas House's work and other people who started writing about Appalachian kids sort of as I was growing up, and then to pull in speculative elements. I've been really excited lately by the work of like Lee Mandello, who wrote Summer Sons, Ashley Blooms, who's just incredible. Her most recent Where I Can't Follow has just been bouncing around in my brain since I read it. I think there's a lot of authors in that sort of vein that are coming up now. One of the main series that influenced me as well was Maggie Stiefvater's The Raven Boys, just because I saw myself really as a queer person in this sort of area for the first time in literature in those books, and I was like, oh wow, like we can get this specific. Like I don't have to sort of be like reading in the margins and sort of picking out, you know, here's a couple of lines that somehow sort of felt like me a little bit. You know, this is one of the first times that I really felt like me all the way in a book. So that one will always be a big one for me as well.
Yes. And so I love all the fairy tale retellings. Like there were a lot of other inspirations for this book, but I remember when I was younger, and I don't remember quite the age, but one of the first fairy tale retellings I ever read and loved was Ash by Melinda Lowe, which is this beautiful sapphic Cinderella retelling with a huntress instead of a prince. And I was like, they can be this too. Retellings can also be this different, and they can be about whoever you want them to be about. And I mean, since then, Girls of Glass and Snow by Melissa Bashir-Dust. I think I'm trying to look at my shelf back here and cheat. But and like her more recent Girl Serpent Thorn, so amazing. Like such great interiority in those characters, such amazing feelings coming up. Cinderella's Dead by Kaylin Bayron is this that brings in like zombie and horror elements to the Cinderella story. And so like I think that my favorite thing about reading a retelling is all the things that are different. You know, you have like this wonderful nostalgic vibe of like the story you know, and then it's not the story you know at all by the time you get to the end. And I love that.
Well, thank you everyone to all the questions. There were so many good ones, but we didn't have enough time, unfortunately. But there are a lot of great ones. Thank you all to the authors for joining me to chat about these fantasy debuts. The bookshop.org links are in the description box below. So definitely pre-order / pick up the books from this panel. And just in general, thank you all so much for chatting and joining me on this, the start of the weekend, I guess.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so
Thank you.
much.
Yeah.
Hopefully everyone has a good reading day, I suppose. Bye, everybody.